What I saw in room 112, it kept me up at night, and I still can't explain what I saw. Any room can be 112. In the hospital, there was always that room that we kind of knew weird things would go on in there that we just couldn't explain. Or back at the nurses' station, we would, talk about our shared stories. And, some of us would not take it seriously, and others of us that had enough experiences would start to say, something's going on with room 112. Now, I'm using 112 as just kind of any room could be room 112. But there was always a room late at night back when I was a nurse, because I am a physician now, but back when I was a nurse in the hospital, we always had that one room where the call light would go off and nobody was in there. We'd go in and turn off the call light. Okay, it must be something wrong with the electronics, or maybe the connections getting worn out, or the lights would go on and we'd have to go in and turn them off. And the big one was the water would start running, because I think that one's a little bit more hard to explain why the water would start running. And of course, we'd have to go in and turn it off. And we would always talk about that's the room where things would go on. And if those of you that work in healthcare, did you ever have a room like that? That room that everyone kind of knew about? Where physical things would go on. It's not like you would just walk in the room and you would get an eerie feeling. Because I had coworkers, they would experience like, doesn't it feel weird in that room? Yeah. So, one night I'm working and walking the hallways, getting things done. And I look into this room and I see someone walking around and jumping onto the bed. And I'm thinking, I didn't think anyone was in that room. So is someone just, is someone on shift and they're just going to take a nap? Or did someone come into the hospital and they're trying to find a place to stay and they're just going to crash in that room? And all these things are going through my mind. And so I walk in there. I'm not afraid because, there's people around. The lights in the hallways are bright. The room and the light in that room happened to be off. So I walk in there. There's no one in there. There's no one in there. And so I'm looking around, it's easy to see under the beds and around. You don't have to really search too hard to see that there was no one in there. So I thought, okay, was it my shadow walking by that room and that kind of displayed against the drapes or the curtains? And that's why I saw a shadow in that room, a fleeting shadow. Or was it just a trick of the light? I have to admit, those things are possibilities, but it's just that feeling you get when you know what you saw. And the biggest thing that kept me up at night, and I talk about this in length on another video that I put out last summer. If you want to watch it, just look at last June. I go into it in detail. But when I had left a patient's house who had passed away, and I'm driving home, and it was a long drive home, like 45 minutes. In my peripheral vision, in my passenger seat, I keep seeing a shadow. And I look over, there's nothing there. But it was like the shadow was waving at me. Now, again, I know it was the middle of the night, and I have to say, drinking a lot of coffee, I have to admit, right? Coffee increases dopamine. You can, it's late at night. Your brain chemistry is a little bit different. Could I have been seeing things? I have to admit, it's a possibility, but it's never happened since. So I always think about that. And sometimes it keeps me up at night, especially after watching something scary on TV, right? Like what was I seeing? Because you know how you see things in your periphery, like right in the corner of your eye, you see that fleeting shadow or something that you just can't explain. And we always just dismiss it or we talk it away. And it only happened that night where it was constant. And I talk about in the long form video where I talk about the whole story of what happened. I had to pull over and kind of get myself together because I had a long drive home. I think I actually went in and bought another coffee, which probably not a good idea, right? But I still can't explain what went on that night. And there is more to the story, but I thought I would share that because as people are commenting on my page, especially recently, having these really unusual stories about seeing shadows at the corner of their room that they just can't explain. And I don't think my husband will mind that I'm sharing this story, but we live in a really interesting house where things have gone down in the past before we owned this house. And if you want to see those videos, they came out last summer. And he's just a very down to earth guy. And finally, one day, he admitted to me that he sees a shadow like off on the side or going down the hallway, just really fleeting right from the corner of his eye. And we have had an unusual experience happen in this house. There was a crime that was committed in this house. So could that be part of what's going on? And he's had some experiences. And I know some of you are going to just dismiss it as like, oh, okay, well, maybe he was waking up from a nap or, it's just a coincidence, and that's fair. But there's only a few of those incidences that still stick out in my mind. What was that? And I know, now that I know neurochemistry and what goes on in the brain and how sleep can affect it and how you have different delta wave patterns in your head. But when I go back to thinking about that hospital and when I know what I saw, a shadow behind a bed and just jumping into the bed. I tell you what, thank God there wasn't a patient in there too, because I wouldn't have been wanting to tell them, oh my God, I just saw the shadow jumping into your bed. Thank God the room was empty. But, again, I know if we're going to be truly skeptical, could it have been a play of light and me walking by the room? But it's never happened since. And, we all know of that one room that weird things happen. So I'm curious if something like that has happened to you. On a former video, I talk about, did you watch my video when Sting, because I love that musician, Sting is talking about he's waking up from a deep sleep and his wife, Trudy, wakes up too. And they see this spirit or this image of the spirit in the corner of their bedroom. Now they live in a beautiful, what is it? I think a 16th century estate. A ton of history. And I believe he said it was a woman with a child that they saw in the corner. It was right after they woke up. Again, that makes me think you're in that different kind of brain space, that different brain wave activity going on right when you wake up. And it wasn't a shadow figure. He said he saw a woman with a child. Now, I didn't see like a three-dimensional person. It was definitely a shadow, a fleeting shadow in a room. And then in my car. Now, only two that I can remember experiences like that of seeing a fleeting thing. But yeah, I think that was really interesting. And it's kept me up at night in times. And that's why I say, be careful watching scary movies, because after I watch a scary movie, it's like, oh my gosh, am I going to see a shadow figure? Please, I don't want to see a shadow. Yeah. But your brain can play with you, right? Your consciousness can go in kind of that certain frequency, that certain vibe. You're kind of creeping yourself out a little bit, I don't know. I think that's possible. Comment below if you've had an experience like that. I think it's really interesting. And especially if you're in healthcare in the hospital and you all know that room, right? Comment below. Okay, thanks for being here. See you on the next one.